If you're looking for a fully electric SUV, but you don't want to be splashing out too much money, but you still want something that's pretty practical, there are not that many options. Well, step forward the Citroen e-C3 Aircross, which is not to be confused with its smaller sibling, the regular e-C3. Now, at the time of filming and in the UK, the e-C3 Aircross can be found for roughly £23,000 to £27,000 without adding any additional options. However, right now in the UK, you've also got a £1,500 government grant, taking the asking price down to £21,500 to £25,500. Indeed, over here you've got 2 different trim levels and 2 different battery pack configurations as well. Now, in this review, which will be covered in such a format, we'll see if it's actually worth its price tag and of course how it compares to some of its nearest competitors. But before proceeding, I would just like to point out that if you do want to find some of the best deals for it, make sure you check out the links down in the description below or the pinned comments, or by scanning the QR code that can be found on your screen. So to kick things off, let's talk about its electric range. And here you have got the standard range 44 kilowatt hour model that will give you 188 miles on the WLTP test cycle. Then you've got the extended range model that has got a larger 54 kilowatt hour battery pack, and that is touted to give you 249 miles again on the WLTP test cycle. Now, for my own mixed driving test on the 44 kilowatt hour model, I netted an impressive 140 to 160 miles. Now, as you'll be able to see from the mileage leaderboards, that's neither the best or worst figures that I've actually attained, bearing in mind its overall price tag, and of course, considering we're talking about the 44 kilowatt hour model, it's actually pretty respectable. If I were to be driving the 54 kilowatt hour model, I would have expected to get north of 200 to 220 miles, therefore making it actually a worthwhile consideration no matter your overall price tag, because in the all-electric market, that will give you a decent range. Now, in terms of regenerative braking, unfortunately over here it's not that great. You've only got the D mode or the comfort mode, and that can be initiated by pressing a button on the center console, and therefore if you were to lift off, the comfort mode will effectively coast while the D mode will start regenning brake and therefore braking a little bit and therefore giving you that sense of deceleration. However, you do not have a one pedal drive, and equally you've not got any sort of customization options like you'd find on some rival alternatives. Now, aside from recouping energy while on the move, you can also plug it in. And via CCS port, it'll take up to 100 kilowatts of input, allowing you to go from 20 to 80% in 26 minutes. Quite handy if you find a rapid charger, for example, those that are found on the motorway. Now, in terms of a wall box, it has got a 7.4 kilowatt onboard charger. And therefore, to attain roughly the same amount of charge, it'll take you between 4 to 5 hours, of course, depending on the battery pack configuration. Now, if you do have access to 3-phase power supply, be it at home or on the move, then you can also upgrade the onboard charger to 11 kilowatts. This will cost you an additional £300 and will bring down those charging times, specifically if you're connecting over the Type 2 port. So next up we get on to driving comfort, and here you have got the advanced comfort suspension configuration which you'd find on some other Citroen vehicles. However, very much like my review of the regular e-C3, I do find that the e-C3 Aircross does have a little bit of a stiffer suspension, and therefore you can feel and hear the bumps that are under you, and there's a little bit of a harsher rebound that can be felt every now and then. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not too bad in the grander scheme of things, but in comparison to the e-C4, the e-C4X, or the likes of the C5 Aircross and also the C5X, I don't think it stands a chance. And therefore, when comparing and contrasting between these vehicles, I just feel that the e-C3 has kind of had the short end of the stick. I'm not really sure if this is due to cost cutting or just purely because of how the vehicle has actually been designed. Now, nonetheless, it's not too bad in the grand scheme of things, and therefore means that when you're just simply pottering around town, it does a decent job of soaking up those anomalies, those speed bumps, and those potholes. Now, in terms of the overall driving dynamics, well, it's not really there. It's no surprise because it's not a sporty SUV, and therefore you don't really have that much connection with the front axle. There's also quite a bit of body lean when you're chucking around winding country routes. And furthermore, here you haven't really got a sport mode driving preset, which will have given you potentially a heightened sense of input in terms of the accelerator pedal and a stiffer steering wheel, and therefore here it's the comfort mode that you're probably going to want to be driving in. Effectively, what I'm trying to say over here is this is not a sporty SUV, so don't expect the world from it. And as for the overall cabin noise, it's actually decent. There is an acoustically treated windscreen, and this becomes heated in the top spec trim, and therefore means that when it comes to even going at lower or higher speeds, you have got a decent insulation within the cabin, therefore reducing the overall cabin noise that one can experience. So next up we get on to performance, and it's not exactly its forte. Here you have got 83 kilowatts of power, or 113 horsepower, and 124.5 newton meters of torque. It's not exactly going to set your world alight, with the 0 to 60 mile an hour claim sitting between 11.7 to 13 seconds. Here I actually had it tested using RaceLogic's Performance Box Touch from 0 to 20 miles an hour in 3.12 seconds, 0 to 30 miles an hour in 4.75 seconds, 0 to 60 miles an hour in a whopping 12.44 seconds, so yes, actually quite slow in the all-electric market, and 50 to 70 miles an hour in a pretty elongated 7.39 seconds. I also recorded a peak acceleration of 0.34 G. As for its top speed, it's electronically limited to 89 miles an hour. So yes, indeed, it's not exactly the snappiest vehicle out there on the market, but it should certainly suffice if you're just going to be pottering around town, or of course, if you're just going to be gradually increasing the speed, for example, on the motorway. So next up we get onto its interior design, and here there are not great use of materials around the cabin. There's quite a bit of harsh plastic that can be found towards the door trims, the dashboard and the center console. However, it does look the part, thanks to the fact that you've kind of got this two-tone design, which is namely due to the inclusion of a fabric material that can be found towards the dashboard and also when it comes to the upholstery itself. However, what I really do love is the fact that practicality has been kept in mind. The use of physical buttons and dials on the steering wheel, traditional stalks, and also, get this, dedicated climate control menus, which are all physical, are certainly very appreciated, specifically in this modern era. It very much is far easier to use on the road in comparison to the vast majority of the alternatives out there. Now that's not to say that technology's gone amiss, because here you've got a center-weighted 10.25-inch display that's very vivid and also intuitively laid out. In fact, in comparison to the vast majority of the alternatives out there, it's actually very simple to operate, which definitely has its pros and cons. But that degree of simplicity will certainly be appreciated by certain consumers. It's also good to see that Android Auto and Apple CarPlay are both supported over a wired and wireless communication, and therefore means it's actually very easy to pair up your smartphone to the infotainment system and get up and go. Now, it's disappointing, however, that turn-based navigation data is not fed through to the projected head-up display. Indeed, this does look like an LCD display, but I've been assured by Citroen, and even by putting my hand in front of the display itself, it is actually projected onto a small little area. Now this kind of serves as a in-between of where you'd normally have a driver's display, for example behind a steering wheel, and where you'd have a projected head-up display, for example on the windscreen. Now the display itself provides you all the key information that you require, such as your traversing speed and the safety systems that are in operation, and is somewhat customizable, and by that I mean by pressing the button on the stalk in order to cycle through, for example, your trip counter or other details that you might require. Now what is quite disappointing, however, is the stock 6-speaker audio system. Here you've got drivers that are found within each of the 4 doors and tweeters that are found within the A-pillars. They'll suffice for your basic music listening, or of course if you're just catching up on the news, but for any serious music lover out there or audiophile, you'd be left disappointed across the sound frequency range. The lows, in other words the bass, sounds a little bit wobbly. The mids, in other words the vocals, sound pretty drowned out, while the highs seem to be overly accentuated at the top end, even while adding only 1 or 2 notches via the treble EQ that can be found via the infotainment system. Alas, over here there's no means of actually upgrading the audio system, so you might want to look into aftermarket solutions, or of course if that's something that's very important to you, you might have to look at a different vehicle altogether. Next up we get onto storage, and here it's disappointing that very much like other Stellantis vehicles, the glove box has not been optimized for right-hand drive vehicles. Nonetheless, towards the top of the center console you've got a non-slip material, and this actually doubles up as a wireless charger in the Max trim. Further down you'll find 2 cup holders and also a small little area which can be handy for placing smaller size valuables. There is also a USB Type-C port here which can provide charge, and also there is another USB Type-C port that can be found towards the dashboard, handy for example for a dash cam or other. There are also 2 further USB Type-C ports that are found at the rear of the center console alongside a 12-volt socket. Now going back towards the center console, you'll also find an area underneath the movable armrest, and is actually pretty sizable. and therefore can be quite handy for taking slightly elongated or larger size goods. In terms of the door bins, the front two will accommodate a 500ml bottle with ease, alongside some small to medium sized valuables, while the rear two are unsurprisingly limited, although still plentiful. It is worth noting over here that no matter which trim level you go for, you will not find a pull down armrest compartment, which would have revealed two cup holders. Now, while storage within the cabin has not been fully optimized, it's good to see that you have got a sizable boot. 460 litres to be more specific, or 1,600 litres if you drop down the seats. I don't think you'll have any sort of problem when it comes to your weekly shops, or of course if you're picking up anyone from the airport with larger sized luggage. It's also very practical. You have got a hatchback design with a manually operated tailgate only. There's no electronically operated options, at least as far as I'm aware, and in the UK. Here you'll also find 60/40 rear split folding seats with a completely flat loading bay. In fact, the boot floor is adjustable, and that is handy, for example, if you do not want to take any sort of additional goods in the compartment that's found underneath. Here, I would actually suggest leaving it in terms of its default position, because you'll find an area that can be handy for placing your charging cables or other. Here it is also worth mentioning that there is no front compartment, in other words an area underneath the bonnet, which would have been handy for providing additional storage for the Citroen e-C3 Aircross. Next up we get onto seating comfort. And first off, I would like to highlight that in the fully electric model, it's not available as a 7-seater, unlike its petrol siblings. Nonetheless, the 5 seats themselves are actually very comfortable, namely the rear outer seats and also the front two. This is thanks to the fact that the manufacturer has fitted the advanced comfort seats, which effectively is an additional layer of padding. I can safely say that both at the front and at the back, I had no problems whatsoever, and the seats themselves are also very accommodating. Now, the front two seats are manually adjustable only, which is slightly disappointing, especially in this day and age. And therefore there's no electronic controls or indeed a driver memory function, which could have been handy if you're going to be sharing the vehicle. Still, here you have got heated front seats and a heated steering wheel that is available in the Max trim. So therefore, just some food for thought if you're going for the Plus model, because these will not be available. Now, in terms of the overall headroom and legroom, it was a non-issue at the front and also at the back. As someone who's just under 6 foot, it was actually pretty surprising. I say this having recently also tested the regular e-C3 and also the likes of the e-C4 and e-C4X. It does actually showcase that the e-C3 Aircross does certainly have its place in the market, and that is of course by providing some additional room at the back. Now, of course, it's not going to compete with larger size SUVs, but for any vehicle within its category, I do think this actually does stand tall. Furthermore, it's good to see that the manufacturer has optimized the rear footwell design by keeping it almost flat and therefore making it pretty comfortable for anyone who sat within the second row. Now, this actually perfectly brings me onto its exterior design, which has undoubtedly been affected due to the extra amount of headroom and legroom you've got in the second row and also the increased boot capacity. But despite that fact, I do think it's got a no sort of start on the road. This is also in part due to the fact you've got a nice sort of silhouette, which is aided with 17-inch alloys, which come fitted as standard across the entire trim range. Towards the front, you've got a somewhat robust look due to the looks of the headlights and also the front bumper. And you've also got a covered front grille, which makes sense in a fully electric vehicle. It's nice to also see the Citroen badge taking the center stage. As for the rear, you have got a somewhat stretched out look, and that's just due to the positioning of the tail lights, which kind of wrap around towards the edges of the vehicle. Again, no complaints whatsoever, and I really do like what Citroen have achieved with this vehicle, which coincidentally has been inspired by the concept Ollie vehicle, which the manufacturer announced a little while ago. Now, in terms of your colour options, you've got 6 different ones to choose from, which range from £275 up to £1,070, and here you'll also have 2-tone roof options. Furthermore, you've also got these colour clips which can be found towards the C-pillars and the front bumper. Now, these have got a nice sort of principle in that you can actually customize it and therefore have a little bit of extra personality, which allows you to differentiate with other vehicles on the road. However, in practice, I do have a little bit of a fear that thieves are actually going to be accessing them and potentially ripping them out of your vehicle. Not only will this distract from the overall look of it, but it means that you might have to constantly buy some new clips, specifically if you live in an area where you have got a lot of thefts or indeed crime. For example, those of us who live in London will know exactly what I mean. So this is actually a perfect segue to talk about safety. And here the vehicle has not been currently tested by Euro NCAP. Well, one can only imagine that it will do relatively well across the board. Now, what I can talk about are the driver assistance systems. And as standard, you have got traffic sign recognition system, cruise control, lane departure warning, speed limit recognition and recommendation, driver attention alert, active safety brake and blind spot on the max trim. Now, all of these are very much appreciated, although it's worth pointing out that they will become re-enabled every single time you step inside the vehicle, and this is just due to some silly regulatory requirements. Thankfully, the manufacturers actually thought it through, because you've got two physical buttons which reside to the right-hand side of the steering wheel, at least for those of us who have a right-hand drive vehicle, and here you can quickly disable the lane departure assist and also the speed limit warning. If you do want some further control of this, you can also go via the projected head-up display and therefore disable some of the other things, for example the speed limit change warning, which is something that plagued the older generation e-C3 and e-C4s, and also something that I noted when I even reviewed the updated models as well. Now, to conclude, I would like to talk about parking and visibility, and very much like other Stellantis vehicles, I don't really like the positioning of the rear view mirror. And here I just feel it's a little bit further down than it should be on the windscreen. Nonetheless, that is of course quite subjective, depending on how you sit in the cabin and how you're positioned. But nonetheless, over here, the frontal vision, while you looking over the bonnet, is actually pretty good. And you've also got some nice wide openings towards the side and also the rear. This is also aided by the fact that you have got a rear wiper, rear parking sensors, and also a rear view camera that come fitted as standard across the entire trim range. In the max trim, this actually adds lateral sensors as well, giving you some extra peace of mind. I should also mention that when it comes to maneuvering it, you've only got a 10.9 meter turning circle, therefore making 3-point turns an absolute breeze. So with all that in mind, it brings us on to a verdict of the new e-C3 Aircross. And sure enough, it's not exactly perfect across the board. I would have really liked if Citroen had improved its overall suspension system, making it more in line with some of its larger siblings. In terms of its overall performance, it's pretty lackluster, specifically in the all-electric market. And also in terms of its electric range, while it's nothing exactly terrible, it's not exactly the best either. Nonetheless, I still do think it's a fantastic value proposition. You've got good use of technology within the cabin, a set of driver assistance systems that come featured as standard. You've got fantastic headroom and legroom both at the front and rear, and you've also got good boot capacity. Combining all of this at its affordable price tag, I can definitely see myself recommending it, and as such, it gets the Best Buy award. And that is with or without the government grant. Now, I'd be curious to know what you make of it down in the comment section below, and how you feel it compares to some of its rivals. And if you've enjoyed this detailed independent review, definitely do consider dropping a like, subscribing, and hitting that bell notification, all of which would be greatly appreciated. As such, I've been Chris from TotallyEV, and I'll hopefully see you next one. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.